Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our CambridgeMATHS for New South Wales webinar today. My name is Christine Devine and I am the New South Wales Sales Manager. Before we make a start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. You can ask any questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A box, and you'll see that at the bottom of your screen, but we will have time at the end of the session for more questions. Our presenters today are Stuart Palmer and Scott Halligan. Stuart Palmer is very well known throughout the state for the professional learning workshops he delivers, both metro and regional. Stuart also assists thousands of Year 12 students every year as they prepare for their HSC examinations. In addition, he has spent more than a decade running tutorials for free service mathematics teachers at the University of Sydney. Also joining us is Scott Halligan, who is our senior maths publisher at Cambridge, and Scott will also be speaking later in the presentation. So without further ado, we will hand over to Stuart. Thank you, Stuart.
Hi, everybody. Yes, finally, after 3 years of being stuck at home, I've started doing my little regional jaunts again. And last week I had some fantastic time in Coffs Harbour, Inverell and Tamworth. Anyway, let's get on with it. I can't believe it's been 10 years since we started doing the Cambridge books for 7 to 10. Time flies. A lot of things have changed, and this time around, we've got a whole new set of challenges to deal with. So let's go. In stage 4, I've got to say in stage 4, not a lot has changed in terms of mathematical content. Certainly geometry's taken a bit of a hit. There is, however, a lot of changes in stage 2 and stage 3. I spent a lot of time backtracking through stage 3 and stage 2. Some things new, some things different, some things gone. Anyway, I'm being really careful to make sure that, things like time, which used to be part of stage 4, now is much reduced. We're still going to include numerous sections which give students a chance to consolidate their learning from stage 2 and 3. And we have a new word for that in the contents page. We're calling it consolidating. So some exercises are badged consolidating. If they're not actually stage 4, they are revision of stage 2 and 3. The big change, the biggest change without a shadow of a doubt is what has happened in stage 5. No more, look, I'm so old, I can remember advanced, intermediate and standard, no more of that. And then we had 5.1, 5.2, 5.3. That is now completely gone. And we now have topics that are designated as stage 5 core and stage 5 path. Just because it's core doesn't mean it's compulsory and you have to do it all. And you certainly don't need to do all the core before you touch any of the path. That is not the intention. This is what I call my 22 lanes of pleasure and pain. You can see that a topic like lane 17, trigonometry is divided into 4 subtopics, A, B, C, D. A and B are part of the core. C is intended for students going to standard and students going to advanced, whereas D is not intended for students going to standard, it's there for students going to advanced. Now, this presents us with a new challenge in terms of putting that in the textbook. You will see that some of the chapters, in fact, cross those lines. So the chapter on trigonometry, it doesn't really make sense to have separate chapters for A, B, C, and D. So some chapters tend to cross a line during the chapter, and I'll show you how you will know when that happens in a moment. Here we go, the path topics for standard. The new kid on the block is networks. So we've had to include that in our books. Thankfully, somebody else wrote that, not me. And as you can see, there are relatively few path topics for standard, compared to a tsunami of path topics for advanced. Now, you don't have to do them all. And even if you decide you want to give the kids a taste of logarithms before the end of year 10, so they're a bit better prepared for that for year 11, you don't have to do all of it. You don't have to do all of these. You don't have to do all of any of them. Polynomials is earmarked for advanced and extension. Poor old geometry, stage 5 geometry. Euler must be screaming in his grave because all the very, very formal aspects of geometry, some of which used to be year 7 and 8, have now been pushed way over to the right-hand side and are designated for students who are going to extension. So we are publishing books for those students. We're calling it Pathway to Advanced / Extension. And you would be familiar, I think, with the old books that were called 5.1, 5.2, 5.3. The content of those books is, the content of these new books is very, very similar to those old books. The content and the structure, we've tried to be true to that. They've been very popular books. I didn't want to change them greatly. So you will enjoy many of the same things that you have seen in the past. Now, in those two books, in year 9, we cover core topics and path topics. And in year 10, we cover core topics and path topics. By the end of year 10, we have pretty much covered absolutely everything in the core and the path, including we decided to throw networks in as an online chapter because we felt that some students working from these books may have indeed fallen off the pathway to advanced and extension, and they might like to do some networks before they start year 11 standard. On the other hand, students who have struggled their way up to the end of year 8, the books that used to be called 5.1, 5.2, I have gone through those with a fine-tooth comb, comparing them to this new structure. Same deal. Year 9 contains core topics and path topics. For standard, year 10, likewise, core topics and path topics for standard, including the networks, which is in there as in a chapter. And NSW says that the core on its own is adequate preparation for year 11 standard. I would say barely adequate. It certainly is desirable to cover at least some of the path topics before the end of year 10 with your students who are heading towards standard. So in these books, we had to add the year 10 book in particular is going to be a bit thicker than the old 5.1, 5.2 book because we needed to include networks, some extra shapes for surface area and volume got bigger, and trigonometry got bigger because we had to include sine rule, cosine rule, area rule, which previously were part of 5.3, so they weren't in those books. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to do it all, but in my opinion, if you can cover everything in those two books, your students are absolutely fantastically prepared for year 11 and 12 standard. In fact, by my calculation, they've done approximately 50% of stage 6 standard already by the end of year 10. I know they need to see things more than once, but anyway, here we go. The gold books. We're not working on the gold books at the moment. The gold books were intended for students who were behind the game coming into 7, 8, 9, 10. And in this case, when I wrote the gold books, my intention was if you use the gold book 7, 8, 9, 10, you are ready for standard just. But since then, we've also got the new stage 6 numeracy, And it's, for the time being anyway, it is still possible not to do maths in year 11 and 12. However, there have been some announcements around that, and we'll have to wait and see what the new government does. Anyhow, some new and old features. This is new. People said to us, it would be handy to be able to pick up a book, go to a chapter, look at a section before the exercise and know, is this revision of stage 3? Is this stage 4? Is it extension? Is it enrichment? So we have these new sections. A lot of people are using learning intentions now. So there's some of those at the start of every section of the book. And then past, present, and future learning. It tells you exactly where this piece of work fits on the K to 10 continuum. And it tells them what it does for their future ambitions as well. In this case, it even tells you that, sorry, incorrect, wrong one. There's another one coming up, I think. Divisibility test, what's it for? Yep, okay. Well, from here on in, this is assumed knowledge that indicates that the students won't be doing divisibility tests again. And so it becomes assumed knowledge beyond that. This one from year 9, pathway to standard, this one tells you, yes, you are doing a stage 5 core topic. It's called Financial Maths A, and you will get another crack at this in year 10. So it's simple. It's all about income. There is another section in year 10, so you don't have to absolutely nail it now. Whereas in the Pathway to Advanced extension book, that second dot point would be absent because we don't have a second go at those things in that book. There's also an indication of how useful is this going to be for stage 6 standard. And in this case, of course, we all know financial maths is a major topic in stage 6 standard. And so there's an indication of the usefulness of this piece of work going ahead. Over the years, a lot of people said that the beginning of the exercise where we had the understanding questions was a little bit confusing and there wasn't a clear connection between the examples and the fluency questions. So we've actually moved the understanding questions into pre-exercise before the examples, a bit like a warm-up. Then comes the examples, and once again, every single example has a little video demo in the online interactive version. I'm always gobsmacked how many people have not even noticed the little video symbol, so it's a bit stronger this time. And new feature, every time there is an example, immediately after the example, there is a thing called Now You Try, which contains questions which are almost practically identical to the example. So the students, having seen you do the example, then have one that they can try, which is almost exactly the same, possibly just with different numbers. And when we get to the exercise now, you go straight into the fluency section, and the beginning of the fluency section should be very closely related to the examples. That's what used to be here was the understanding section. That has now gone prior to the examples, and still going forward, we still have the 3 different levels of difficulty of questions.
Stuart,
Halfway, yeah.
Stuart, I just wanted to say something about the Now You Try questions. Go back just 1 or 2 slides.
Yep. Go, Scott.
There we go. Yeah. So there are a couple of purposes for these Now You Try questions. One of those is there is an element of passiveness to just reading through a work solution that already exists to a question and trying to understand how that works. Now, it's an important part of the learning learning of this content to see a model of how to go about answering a question. And then there's the added video demonstration of that, as Stuart mentioned. The Now You Try questions are an active way of engaging with this question straight away. So you can see the question, you can see how it is done in terms of an ideal work solution, and then you can immediately try a question exactly like the one that you've just seen before you get to the exercise. You can put your hand up if you don't understand, and so on. The other value of these Now You Try questions is that these can be used as demonstration questions for the teacher of questions that students have not seen the solution for before. So if you're explaining something, you've got these worked examples in the book, you can go through them without the solution to questions that students haven't seen the answers or the solution for before. So that's the various ways and reasons we've put those in. So there's one of these for every worked example for all of the books in the series. All right, continue on, Stuart.
Thank you, Scott. Halfway through every chapter, we have a new feature called the Progress Quiz, where there's a couple of questions for each of the exercises up to that point. That's a new thing. We didn't have that before. At the end of the chapter or during the chapter, we have a variety of things as well. This one, applications and problem solving. A new one called working mathematically. There's one of those per chapter where we go through the various stages and components of working mathematically usually with a real life kind of problem. A lot of people said, when NESA introduced the compulsory investigative style assignment to stage 6, a lot of people wound that back and started doing it in years 7, 8, 9, 10. And so we thought that these could be part of an investigative style assignment. This is an old feature, puzzles and problems and challenges, still there. Investigation, yep. The chapter summary with the mind map, still going with that. This is new. When I mentioned this to a live audience in Inverell the other day, they clapped. Yes, who would have thought? They clapped. The chapter checklist with success criteria. Every chapter is going to have one of these. Chance for kids to go, yep, can do those things. A question for every single one to try, making sure they're ready for some sort of assessment and ready to move on. The chapter review at the end, yep, still there. Right. Now, people have been banging Christine's door down, saying, Christine, when are we going to get the scope and sequence? Now, last time around, I knocked up a scope and sequence and we gave it away. And some people thought it was, plug and play, and then came back to me and said it gave me lots of good reasons why it didn't work. This time around, I'm going to deliberately put the brakes on a bit. And I've been visiting schools. I've already been to about 15 different schools, plus ran some days where people came from any schools, and I've been pitching this idea. It's a bit like Shark Tank on the day, and it normally takes a bit longer than this, but I'll give it a go. I've got exactly 25 minutes. Let's see how we go. Right. So we have more freedom than we've ever had before to do as much or as little in each of those 22 lanes of pleasure and pain as we desire. The idea is that between 7, 8, 9, 10, lane 8, say, we would progress our students as far along that lane as we possibly can. In the case of area and surface area, that might mean that for area anyway, that we would need to go back before we go forward for some students, and then take them as far down the area and surface area road that we can. Right. Without drowning them in the process. Okay. I'd like to talk about not 7, 8, 9, 10, but what happens after 7, 8, 9, 10. I've been doing work for the STEM Teacher Enrichment Academy. I don't think I'd even heard the acronym STEM 10 years ago when I started working on the textbooks. But since then, I've learned a lot about STEM through this job. I've spent a lot of time working with maths teachers, but also science teachers and TAS teachers, because they come to us as a group of 6 usually, and we help them to do something under the banner of STEM in their schools. I like the acronym STEM. I'm happy that M is part of the STEM. I don't care that M is the last letter at all. Some people do. Doesn't bother me. I'm happy to be part of that. But there is a brutal reality about STEM, and this is it. If kids get excited about STEM and they want to pursue a STEM career, they probably need to do a university degree. Some of those STEM careers are highly paid and have labour shortages, believe it or not. So in order to really keep that door open, students need to do a university degree of a particular nature, and they also need to do year 11 and 12 advanced, preferably with extension 1. The jury is in. People who try to do STEM degrees at uni off the back of standard, they are highly likely to fail first-year university courses. The data is in. Sydney Uni, to their credit, introduced this prerequisite. You can Google those 3 words and see the list of degrees for which you need to get in advanced a band 4, 5, or 6. Many students don't know about this until it's too late. During COVID, I was doing work at a new school. We had this conversation with the parents of year 8. What we told the parents of year 8 was that we're going to do everything we can to keep the STEM door open by exposing students to 5.1, 2, and 3 topics. We wouldn't get through all of them, but we would do enough. So we have the power now to give our students enough of 5.3, not called that anymore, giving them the right core topics and the right path topics before the end of year 10, so they are in a situation going into year 11 where they can do advanced. Now, I know some students that is unrealistic, and if that's the case, I think you should be talking to the parents about it, and those students should be talking to careers advisors sooner rather than later. So, you know, I've lived through several different syllabuses. This is the one I grew up with, Advanced Intermediate Standard. Talk about fake news, false advertising. Hardly anybody went from intermediate to 2 unit and then survived and stayed in 2 unit. That was, I can literally count students on one hand who came into my 2 unit class off that background and then survived. And then we got the 5.123 and more of the fake news, that you could go from a 5.2 only background through this very narrow pipeline and succeed in 2 unit maths. Hardly ever happened. When the draft of this syllabus came out, this diagram was in the draft and well, I did think this was closer to truth in advertising, that, you know, you might get into advanced by the skin of your teeth, but that arrow points downwards, not upwards. My agenda this time around is to try and help schools make really good choices for all their students in order to keep them on that pathway to advanced for as long as possible until it hurts, and then, only then, change. So here we go. This is my fledgling scope and sequence, which I am going to develop further, and I'm going to make a video because it does take quite a bit of explanation. I think in the books, we had that Year 7, Chapter 1, which was almost all revision of Stage 3. A lot of add-ups and takeaways and multiplies and divides with whole numbers. Almost all of it was revision. Now, I know some students need that, but you know, I could talk about student A and student Z. Student A does not need that topic. Their number skills, their non-calculated number skills are already very well developed. Student Z, on the other hand, really needs that stuff, but trying to do it in 3 weeks, it doesn't help anybody. Student A doesn't need it, gets bored, becomes a behavior issue. Student Z, too fast. You can't make up for 3 years of lost time in 3 weeks. So I'm suggesting to everybody that that early stuff could be treated as drip feed. 5 quick questions, the start of every lesson. Leave your calculators in your bag. We're gonna work on non-calculator numeracy skills. You know the non-calculator section of NAPLAN, the minimum test they do in year 10 or year 11, and they also need to do those kind of tests if they want to get a job in a trade, even to work in preschool. Now there are numeracy and literacy tests you need to do. So I'm not discounting the importance of non-calculator numeracy skills. I'm just saying maybe we could do it in small doses rather than one fell swoop. And then in term 1, maybe we could try and get the kids, you know, they're excited to come to high school and have a maths teacher, someone passionate about maths. So maybe we could try and do a mixture of new-ish things. And the new Year 7 book in Chapter 2, which I think you are going to receive, that chapter does contain a mixture of things which the students possibly have not seen before. You might also want to throw in some positive, negative number work there. The schools I have visited, most of them had positive, negative numbers on their scope and sequence in term 1. Here's the thing. I think the sooner we get to algebra, the better. Algebra, I have decided after much soul searching that algebra is the gatekeeper. Students who are going to make it into advanced and thrive in advanced, it is algebra that is the difference between those who stay and those who jump, in my opinion. So I think we need to do it early in Year 7, followed by a dose of equations. And then the topic we call measurement, you know what? We don't measure anything in that topic. We do perimeter and area by formulas, which are equations, which are built on algebra. So, you know, I have worked with books in the past that do that topic very early on. I think that's a bad idea now. And the beauty of doing equations first is you can ask the backwards question. If the perimeter is 60 and the base is 15, what would the length be? They can do that by setting up an equation and solving it in a very efficient method. Now, I love statistics and probability. It is my favorite topic to teach. That makes me a bit weird, I think. But anyway, compared to other teachers I've worked with, unfortunately, when it comes to being on a pathway to advanced and extension, it really doesn't pay the bills. I actually think that statistics and probability should go late in the year, and it should certainly not be used to determine what class students go into in year 9. Year 8, term 1, it's time to have a second go at algebra and then get serious about indices. And then there's some other things I have not put on this scope and sequence yet, like geometry, which I used to think was so important to give them a really thorough grounding in geometry through 7, 8, 9, 10. But then it got withdrawn from stage 6 almost completely. So the importance of geometry, well, yeah, poor old Euclid. Don't get me wrong, you still need to do it, but I think we don't need to be so fussy about the reasons they write, because nobody's going to pick on their reasoning during the HSC exam. Another go with equations. Pythagoras' theorem is an equation, so yes, we should do Pythagoras after the second go of equations. And then a funny one, percentage problems like GST. The GST was added to a price, and the price including GST is $330. What was the original price? Now, of course, we would do that using the unitary method, but I've noticed that a lot of students actually don't like the unitary method because they have to write so much. They would prefer to set up a problem like that as an equation and then solve that equation. And then it's a good time to do ratios and rates, a really important topic for everybody. But that topic is massive in year 11 and 12 standard, absolutely massive. I pulled apart the 2016 HSC exam for General 2, and honestly, there were at least, I reckon there were 10 questions about currency conversion, ratios, rates, the capture-recapture method, similar triangles, and it's possible to employ just one method to all of them. Direct variation and even inverse variation. So that's a key topic for everybody. The standard students, don't get me wrong, the standard students will get probably another 2 goes at it in year 11 and 12. But for the advanced students, it's one of those topics that becomes assumed knowledge when they hit year 11 standard, year 11 advanced, I'm sorry. And again, area, volume, capacity, it's called measurement, but nobody really measures anything except by using the information given and plugging numbers into a formula. And then comes linear relationships, and again, statistics, probability. It pains me to say this because I love doing a lesson where the students gather some real statistics as a result of doing a probability experiment. Some of you have seen the stuff I do with Smarties, little boxes of Smarties, or rolling dice, maybe creepy critters, that sort of thing. I love that, and it's a great vehicle to do probability and statistics together. Right, and then we come to year 9, and this is where in the past we have tended to put students in a box. The box used to be called advanced or intermediate or standard, and then it was called 5.123 or 5.1, 5.2, or even just 5.1. Trouble was, for a lot of students, they were put in the box was closed, the gaffer tape was applied to the roof of the box. The trouble was the instructions were on the outside of the box, and the instructions were unless you're doing advanced, unless you're doing 5.3, you will not be doing calculus in year 11 and 12. And over the years, I've met many students and disgruntled parents who found out too late, like halfway through year 10, found out too late that they would not be either not permitted or not successful if they tried calculus in year 11. I've also had this conversation with parents a lot. Yeah, here we go. Not parents, sorry, teachers. Maths, this is maths teachers who have taught calculus a lot. And this is the question I ask them, and we vote, and everybody else watches, because there's an awful lot of maths teachers who've never taught advanced in year 11 and 12, never had a go at teaching calculus, and possibly never will. And this is the question. Students coming into year 11 advanced, many of them will bail in the first 6 months. The question is, do they bail because the new topics like calculus that they've never seen before are too hard, and that's why they leave your room and go to standard? Or B, is it because they didn't bring their prior learning with them? And I've got to tell you, I'm not making this up, it is almost 100% B. They leave your advanced classroom because they do not have a solid memory of the really important topics they did in year 9 and 10. And then we talk about next, what are the really important topics in year 9 and 10? And it's basically algebra, 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 equations, algebraic fractions, indices, including the negative indices and the fractional indices and the surds and the logarithms, perhaps. Maybe they should have had a bit of a go at logarithms, these nonlinear relationships. That's what kills them. It's not statistics and probability. That they are the topics, as I said, that do not pay the bills. So here's what I'm suggesting. We don't put them in the box and close the lid too quickly. And in fact, you know what? I've also decided in my old age that the year 8 topics are not particularly good at deciding who goes into what box. This time around, a lot of people, including me, are saying, you know what? Let's give everybody a go with indices A. That's a topic, indices A, and maybe indices B. Give everybody a go with that. Maybe some students will do it faster than others, particularly if you have graded classes in year 9. Same with trig, trigonometry A, trigonometry B. That's all the right-angled stuff. Some students could go faster with that than others. Maybe once everybody has finished trig A and trig B, that might be a really good time for a common assessment task. But some students would go faster than others. So maybe this little yellow block down here, we could prize apart these 2 green blocks for some students and do some of the yellow stuff in between. Maybe semi-independently, you know, you might be in a really small school and there are 3 kids, you know, you might only have 1 class in year 9, and there are 3 kids who have absolutely smashed indices A and B. Maybe they could use the examples about logarithms, all of which have a video, as we mentioned. Maybe they could do some logs or some trig graphs, unit circles, semi-independently, while the rest of the cohort catches up. So I'm suggesting that every new term, we start with a new critical core topic. Yeah, that means at the end of the term, you have to be willing to say, that's it, I'm finished, I'm done. It's time to move on, because new term, new topic. And when I finish my making hay while the sun shines scope and sequence, I'm going to make sure that these new term, new topics are the ones that will keep students on a pathway to advanced for as long as possible. And if they fall off that pathway before the end of year 10, well, they'll be very well prepared for standard. In fact, they might be over prepared for standard, but it's better to be over prepared for standard than to be under prepared for advanced, drop out, go to uni, unprepared for STEM, fail your first year maths course at uni. That is a devastating consequence, a massive financial penalty. They've never seen the word fail before at school. To fail first year maths because you need it for your STEM degree, that is the brutal reality of STEM. And in workshops, we've been looking at this list here, path topics for advanced. In my workshops, we've been looking at that list, and the overwhelming agreement is trigonometry, yep, yes, critical, area and surface area and volume. You know what? It's just a collection of formulas. That's all it is for those kids who are borderline, will I do advanced? What really matters is these topics up here for those kids who are going to scrape into advanced by the skin of their teeth and hang on the edge of the cliff by their fingernails, trying to make it through to advanced. By the way, I mentioned that you need to get a band 4, 5 or 6 in advance to qualify for the Sydney Uni prerequisite. That's 85% of the candidates. And some of you wouldn't know this, in order to get bottom of band 4, 45% raw is usually more than enough. In the advanced HSC exam, 45% raw gets you into the bottom of band 4. I think that's lower than most people think. Right, I've got 2 minutes before I hand over to Scott. That's all I wanted to say at this point. Are there any quick questions now? Scott, Christine?
No, we've managed to answer the ones that have come through, Stuart. There was some questions just about how some of the features, whether, for example, the learning intentions and those notes on the syllabus will be in the print books, or if they're just intended for teachers only. Do you want to say something about that quickly?
Yeah, look, I have realised over the years that if you put things online, some people will not realise they're there and miss them. And in this case, learning intentions are there for students and teachers, so they should be in the book. And that information about, is this a core topic? Is this a path topic? Is this revision? Is it extension? What is it? Is it enrichment? Am I going to do it again? I'm struggling a bit with this thing in year 9. Am I going to do it in year 10 again or not? I think that's vital information for students and teachers. And I know in a lot of schools, the students only work from the print book. So yeah, those green boxes that are at the start of every new section, there's about 120 of those altogether. They're in the print book. That's what we thought was best.
Yeah, and the syllabus notes are very student friendly. They're written with the student in mind so that they can get an understanding of where they are in the book, where they are in the topic, and where more broadly where they are in the broader syllabus.
Everybody, this snapshot here, I've been sharing this 2-page document all over the state. If you haven't got it yet, feel free to get in touch. Plus the 22 lanes of pleasure and pain. I have a PDF booklet for all 22 of those, where I gather together all the information, say area and surface area. There's a booklet, everything from stage 2 through to stage 5 is in that one booklet, so that you can enjoy the progression of that learning as students pass through stages 2, 3, 4, and 5. Happy to share that information, or better still, I'm running workshops all over New South Wales. So see if you can get along. Yeah, check out the PD4Maths website.
A couple more, Stuart, and then we'll
Yep.
talk about the next, go to the next part of the presentation. Comment from John Blanco. My advanced kids struggle with functions within linear relationships.
Yep.
And question from Ava. In years 7 and 8, do you also recommend new term, new topic?
Yes, I think the new term, new topic is, I wish I'd thought of it 25 years ago when I was a head teacher. I just think the topic that carries over from one term to the next is a bit dreary. I mean, there is no end. We are working on a continuum. So if you stop, if you stop doing something at the end of the term, you are going to see that topic again a bit later. I think there's a lot to be said for starting a new term, new topic, and making sure that the new topic in the new term is a really critical one. John, who mentioned functions, this topic here, functions and other graphs, I don't think that should be a standalone topic. It's certainly not a standalone chapter in the books. There's 3 things in that chapter. Number 1 is function notation. That could be introduced when you do straight lines and nonlinear graphs. And the other one, next one, is domain and range. You know, if you introduce circles, you might as well talk about domain and range at that point rather than waiting until year 11. And the other one is, once you've drawn a graph like a parabola, moving it up, down, left, right, reflections, etc. Have a good look at that topic. I think it's wise to break it up and do it by drip feed. Now, the question from John about, you know, year 11 students who can't draw graphs, you know, maybe in the future, I don't know, students like them, they might have been better off doing these topics twice rather than doing certain core topics, or certainly some of the other path topics. Just saying, you know, in that second half of year 10, once the kids have made their decision about a year 11 maths course, maybe we should really take a good look at this chart and say to ourselves, should we really do polynomials? Should we really do any geometry? Probably not. Do we need to finish probability? Probably not. They're going to do it again in year 11. And I know they don't like that topic, but it's not as critical as these things up here, in my opinion. The world is our oyster. We can do whatever we like with these things. We don't have to finish every topic. We can do what's best for our students. Yes. Any more questions, Scott?
There are a couple of related ones, but I reckon maybe we move on and then we can get to some of the other
Sure.
ones later on, because they'll open up a bit of a can of worms.
Yep. Okay. Off you go, Scott.
Okay, so one of the things that we are doing for this edition is a fairly comprehensive, when I say fairly, I mean very comprehensive diagnostics tool that will be complementary as part of the online teaching suite, part of the teacher resources. So this won't be some kind of paid for add-on. It will be accessed via the teacher resources in the teacher website. And maybe Stuart, move on to the next slide. It's not intended to replace all kinds of formative assessment. It's not a summative assessment tool. It is specifically a diagnostic assessment tool that will be able to be used alongside the teaching of the textbook. There'll be a lot of flexibility when using it. And I think that the conversations that we've had here today, some of the things that Stuart has talked about in terms of the important decisions that need to be made really by the end of year 8 about what pathway students are going to go down on their way to stage 6. This tool will, I can see that it being very useful for that. So there'll be a lot of PD about what I'm talking about later, in the coming months as Christine and her team go out to schools, and you'll be able to ask Stuart about this as well, and myself when I'm around. So this is just a very broad overview of this. You'll see demos and all these kinds of things later on. But I just wanted to go through a couple of the things that inspired what I'm talking about. And you may recognize some of the language here because we did pay a lot of attention to Nessa's own advice when it came to this kind of assessment. So the tool that I'm talking about is aimed to enable students to demonstrate their understanding or misunderstanding of the concepts or their ability or inability to execute and apply skills, and displays evidence about student attainment in relation to syllabus outcomes. Achievement, though, was also an important part of what we've built in terms of this diagnostic tool, because attainment is not the only measure of performance. We thought that the ability to measure students' growth over time is also very important, and to factor that into the assessment of how a student is going. Another of the goals was to allow teachers to modify their future plans according to the results of the data that comes through in the diagnostic testing, meaning that the teacher gets the information that they need at the right time. And this is something we are working very hard on. That will be a big part of the tool. It'll come with recommendations for next steps for how to improve student outcomes. So this will be known as follow-up work. There was early talk of calling it remedial work or something along those lines, but when students are not doing remedial work or not in need of remedial work, and they are at level or above level, it also means that they can be set follow-up work and improve on the things that they need to improve on or can improve on. And finally, there will be a whole host of reporting available in connection to this, available in various graphical forms as well as tables. And importantly, the data will be exportable in different ways so that you can use it in your own systems and for your own purposes. Next slide, please, Mr. Palmer.
I've done it.
Oh, there we go. So there's also an element of this where students, we encourage them to take ownership of their own learning. And obviously the classroom teachers are the people who will be in charge of this. There is not an automatic method for students accessing their own data in terms of these diagnostic assessments, because we understand that there may be an element of it being demotivating to certain students, but certain parts of their performance will be available to show to them in ways that is motivating to them. And as I said, help them take some ownership of their own learning. And finally there, in terms of the administrator, this tool is going to have a great deal of flexibility. And what that means is there'll be decisions that need to be made at an administrative level for a school about how to use this tool in terms of setting difficulty levels, the amount of testing, the types of testing, and so on, how frequently it's done, whether you do a pre-test and a post-test, whether you do a pre-test and a mid-test and then a post-test, or whether you do more frequent, smaller tests throughout the duration of a unit of learning. All of those will be possible via this tool. Next slide, please, Stuart. So not to go on too long about this, as I said, Christine and her team will be available to give some PD on this. It is very detailed. It's a big system, and there's a lot to talk about, so I won't go too much into more detail here. But the essence of what we've built is has its foundation on what we aim to understand were the smallest usable components for this diagnostic purpose, which we've called mathematical skills. Now, these aren't NESA mathematical skills or from CARA, the Australian curriculum, or anywhere else. These are a way of the authors assessing the syllabus outcomes and the textbook content and breaking them down into their smallest testable parts. And there is a great deal of alignment of those mathematical skills with both the worked examples throughout the textbook, as well as the learning intentions and the success criteria as well. So there's a very cohesive set of markers of performance there. And that table on the left there shows that the mathematical skills are common to both the textbook and to the syllabus. So what that means is that when these tests are being built, you can choose to start from the structure of the textbook. So if you're familiar with Cambridge's test maker, it will be working in a similar way. You can start with the structure of the textbook and then choose questions and build tests like that. Or you can start from the perspective of the syllabus outcomes as well and set tests in that way. And regardless of the way that you are doing it, performance against these mathematical skills will be measured, and they'll show up in each method of doing this. So if you're building tests against the syllabus, they'll show against the textbook structure. If you're doing it via the textbook structure, you'll get performance against the syllabus as well. Next slide, Stuart. So I've said a little bit about this already. The reporting is extremely comprehensive with this. It's more comprehensive than any kind of system that you will have seen that has come from Cambridge. The intention, as I said, is to show strengths and weaknesses against these mathematical skills, what specific skills students can or can't do. And as I said, there's a very close alignment with these skills to the worked examples throughout the textbook. I've talked about the mapping earlier. This is a good feature here. The reporting can be zoomed in or zoomed out, meaning that you can look at the results in more or less detail. So you can zoom right out and look at students or classes' results against the syllabus strands, or whatever we are calling those now, number and algebra, measurement, geometry, and so on. They don't tend. I can't see a specific name for those anymore.
Scott, you said the G word.
The G word. What's that?
Geometry.
Yeah. Measurement and
space.
Yes. Is that okay? Right.
Sorry.
I'm living in the past.
Yes.
And also, you can zoom in a little bit more and show performance against the learning areas, formerly called substrands. And more details against mathematical skills, and then in even more details against specific questions. There's a whole heap of filtering that is available. You can build Gutman charts out of this and so on, export the data in different ways, etc. As the light goes off in Cambridge's boardroom, there we go. Next slide, please, Stuart. I've talked about this already a little bit. There are 5 questions in the banks for this diagnostic assessment tool for each mathematical skill, and there's a ratio of 2 to 2 to 1 in terms of 2 easy, 2 medium, and 2 harder. There'll be options available to schools about what mix of questions they would like in terms of how they do diagnostics. So for some schools, it's not important for this purpose to have harder questions in there. For other schools, that is important, so there'll be choices available. I've talked about the basis of the mathematical skills being very closely connected to the worked examples in the textbook. The skills will be linked to the demonstration videos that are created by the authors. We've talked about the Now You Try questions. So what this means in terms of follow-up work is if students are performing underneath where they should be against certain mathematical skills, there are very clear steps that can be taken to improve their performance. So for example, out of the reporting, if you choose to set follow-up work with your students, you can point them towards worked examples that are almost exactly like the questions that they have got wrong in connection to specific worked examples. You can show them videos of someone doing questions like the ones that they got wrong. And then, as I've said previously, now that we have these Now You Try questions, they will be able to try questions straight after watching a video, just like the ones that they have just seen. And finally, all of the exercise questions, well, not all, but the questions from the exercise that are linked to these specific mathematical skills will be recommended as well for students who want to do a little bit extra homework. Okay, I think that's it, Stuart. All right, I'll now pass on to Christine, or are we going to go to Q&A now, Christine?
Q&A.
Yes, I think, yeah, we've got some questions there. So Scott, I'll leave those with you.
Sure, okay. So a question, Stuart, a little bit about how we are covering content in years 7 and 8. So obviously there's a core path structure overall in the new syllabus, but in terms of the syllabus documentation, that starts at stage 5. How have we gone about putting in content in years 7 and 8 for students who are either going to do standard perhaps, or they're going a little bit further and maybe aiming towards advanced extension when they get to stage 6?
Sure. Well, in stage 4, there's no core and path. In stage 4, it is stage 4, but nothing says you have to do everything. We have included numerous sections. Well, should I say, our previous edition, our first 2 editions had numerous sections which were basically stage 3 content. We have left them in place. Some of them have a new badge called consolidating, and a little description that indicates that, you know, this is stage 3 material that is used for stage 4 and 5. And then there were some things that fell off the table, such as congruent triangles. Look, I know some schools will still want to do congruent triangles the old-fashioned way with the 4 tests and, you know, same with similar triangles. So some of those things stayed in the book and are labelled extending, and the description in the green box will say that this is actually stage 5 path material for students who are wanting to do a bit more. In the feedback process, you know, we heard from schools that said we can't do everything in the year 7 book. But we also heard from schools who said there wasn't enough in the year 7 book.
That's right.
So after we heard that, I was reluctant to delete anything. But the default on that is, well, if it's actually stage 5, let's tell the truth and call it extending, and tell them that it is part of a stage 5 path. So look, you know, we've done our best to make the year 7 and 8 books a mainstream book, and then some people said it was too hard, so we introduced the gold books as well. Some people said the gold books are too hard as well. So, well, you know, we can only do what we can do. So there remains 2 different year 7 books, but I've got to say this time around, there is more information in those green boxes about what is core stage 4 work, even though it's not called core, and what is consolidation of previous learning, and what is extension. Interesting, the chapter in the current year 7 book, we introduced a chapter called time there, because time was a stage 4 topic. in the 2012 syllabus. Well, now NESA has decided that we don't need that. They're all experts by the end of year 6. Well, I know they're not. Let's be honest, we know they're not. So we have left that material in the book, or perhaps it's moving online. I can't remember off the top of my head. And it is going to be called Consolidating, even though we know and you know that some students are still grappling with hours, minutes, seconds, telling the time and time differences in Australia and the rest of the world. So we haven't deleted that. Same thing with converting between millimetres, centimetres and metres. NESA seems to think that your students are experts with that by the end of year 6. We know they're not. So that section in year 7 is now called Consolidating, and we think it's important that it stays in the book. I don't know who asked that question. I certainly rambled. Can we go back to that person? Does that person have a follow-up question to ask?
Yeah, there are a few related questions, Stuart, on similar topics. We'll go to another related one.
Yep.
Let's see here. This one's from Natalia. Is there a clear link between what is tested in minimum standard in year 10 and the core pathway courses? So if we don't teach some things in stage 5, will students struggle to pass minimum standards if we have focused on core only topics?
So we're talking about the minimum standard tests they have to do in year 10, 11. I reckon they've done all of that by the end of stage 4. They've covered vast swathes of that, and certainly stage 5 core. A subset of stage 5 core would cover minimum standards test. I don't think there's a huge amount in the path topics that they need for minimum standard, but I'm not an expert on minimum standard, so if somebody wants to tell me I'm wrong, send me an email. I remember when my daughter did minimum standard, she said, "Oh, that was so frustrating. I haven't done that stuff since year 7."
Yeah.
A lot of it, multiplying decimals by decimals. She had forgotten how to do some of those basic skills, so it stressed her out to the max. Anyhow, next.
A couple of questions related to lower level students. So for example, from Mel Cook, I have stage 2 and 3 kids in my year 8 class that will still be working at that level at the end of the year. What do you suggest is the best way to proceed, and what book do you recommend for these students?
Well, that is why we produced the Gold series. In the previous system with the 5.1, I did not believe that the 5.1 was the bee's knees for those kids. So in the Gold books, we included material from stage 4 and 5.1. I also included a little bit of 5.2 as well. Financial maths, they should be able to do the financial maths in 5.2. During COVID, I was doing work at a brand new school, and those kids you're talking about, we set up a pathway for them called Numerate Citizens, a dedicated pathway, and nobody was placed on that pathway at the start of year 9 without parental consent. And the deal was that we would not be doing everything in 5.1 and 5.2. We would do what we thought was the most useful mathematics for those students. We called it Numerate Citizens, and we focused very much on the numeracy aspects of mathematics. We're trying to have them ready for year 11 standard, but more likely they would do year 11 numeracy or no maths. We're not going to do fractional indices, that's for sure, and probably barely touch upon negative indices, except for the way that negative indices are used in scientific notation. Briefly, So we spoke to the parents about that at the end of year 8. Second half of year 8, letter went out to those parents. We had an open, honest conversation, and we sought their consent, because once they went into that pathway, there were certain STEM doors closing beyond school. Yeah, I hope I've answered that question satisfactorily.
Yeah, there's not too many more, Stuart. There's a
Can I say
question.
one more thing about the pathway to standard books? The year 9 pathway to standard, year 10 pathway to standard. Maybe, you know, before a student is given that book to work from, maybe there does need to be a conversation with parents, student, and careers advisor, because, to be brutally honest, a student who uses our pathway to standard book in year 9 and 10, they might flourish all of a sudden. If that happens, they should be using a different book, ASAP. Like I said, 9 and 10 pathway to standard is an outstanding pathway to standard. It is in no way preparation for year 11 advanced. And again, the gatekeeper for year 11 advanced, it's all the algebra, the graphs, the indices. Yeah, not the statistics and probability, unfortunately.
A question from Adam here on the reverse situation. So if a student was to move paths from advanced/extension to standard in either year 9 and 10, would they need to purchase the standard path book, or would a continuation on the advanced/extension book be sufficient? So maybe we'll talk about that situation and some of the things that are in year 9 and year. So what's in year 9 standard that's not in,
so there are sections, you know, in the year 9 book for standard and the year 9 book for advanced. I'm trying to think of something. Expanding algebraic expressions with brackets in them, or solving equations which have brackets in them. So both year 9 books, well, in fact, all 3 year 9 books, including gold, would have a section like that. They are similar, but the pathway to advanced books, they cut to the chase faster. So they have fewer simple questions and a greater number of more challenging questions. But a student who was on a pathway to advanced could continue to use the pathway to advanced book, and a teacher could make constructive suggestions about exercises and questions they should do, and ones they could skip. Did I answer that question? Whoever asked that.
I think so. I mean, maybe we're nearing the end of our time here. Maybe a comment for a student like that on networks content, and maybe with a proviso of how networks is covered in standard in the first place once they get to stage 6. So how much preparation, for example, would such a student need when they get to if they change their minds and want to do standard in year 11?
Yeah, well, I actually, some people are talking up the path topic called networks. I'm not one of those people. In fact, if I was head teacher in a school, I would not be putting networks on my scope and sequence for year 10. If I did, it would be very late in year 10, and it would only be for students who have definitely chosen standard. I'll tell you why. I've got hundreds of teachers who've done my online course about networks, and I've spoken to them, what do you like about networks? And the number one thing they say about networks in year 12, standard 1, standard 2, you open the window, it's a breath of fresh air. It's a level playing field. It's a brand new topic for everybody. Nobody's seen it before. Nobody's done it before. I just, if you do that path topic and then you've got them again 2 years later, my questions are, how much would they really remember? First one. And second question, you could have half the class who did that topic and half the class who didn't do that topic. So the level playing field is gone. I just don't think it's the best path topic for those kids. If you really want to do something for kids going to standard, I would say go back to year 8 and 9 and do rates and ratios again. That is a massive section for kids going to standard. If they're not good with rates and ratios, especially the rates, that is going to be an uphill battle. I think that's more important for those kids than doing networks.
Yep. One final thing, and then we're out of time, Stuart.
Yep.
This is basically a yes or no question. Is there a plan for Cambridge to have the teaching programs again this time available on Cambridge Go?
Yes, but it will happen, but it won't happen overnight. Yeah. I'm still learning about the new syllabus, and you know what? Every time I go to a school, and I'm doing that a lot. Tomorrow I'm going to a school in Sydney. I've been to Sydney schools. I've been to selective schools. I've been to high fee charging schools. I've been to, low SES schools. Every time I do one of those visits, somebody says something that stays in my brain and is going to have a slight impact on what I put in programs, etc. And certainly the scope and sequence, which I am now finally putting together, is quite different to what I would have done 3 months ago. So, just give us a bit of time. The main thing at the moment, I think, is just to get really familiar with the syllabus. The simplest way to do that is to send me an email and ask for the 22 lanes in 22 booklets. That's how the syllabus should be written. You should be able to open up a section that says area and see everything from stage 2 through to stage 5 all together in one place. That was not a yes/no answer, Scott. I'm sorry. I'm done.
It started out that way.
Okay.
All right. I think that's all the time we have.
Yep.
Stuart, a fantastic job. Very well done. Very comprehensive. Questions that people have. I think we got to almost everything there. If we didn't, we'll get to you later on. We do have a record of your email addresses. So thank you very much for your attendance and for paying attention, for your excellent comments and questions, for listening attentively and all those sorts of things. So I will pass on to Christine Devine, who will wrap things up for us.
Okay, thanks Scott and Stuart for your presentations today. I think I want to take you on the road with the sales team because there's a lot involved there. And as you can see, the sales teams, you'll know most of them, Caroline Poole, Sabika and Deborah Wilson. Their contact details are there on the screen, so please contact us to visit your schools for PD. This webinar has been recorded and we will be distributing to all the registered participants. And you've all been entered into a $500 prize draw, which will be drawn tomorrow, and the winner will be notified by mail. But thanks everyone again. And again, thank you, Stuart and Scott. And please contact us for any information on the demonstration, pricing, etc.
Bye, everybody.